Good evening. My name is Brian Meeks, and I'm the chair of Africana Studies here at Brown. And I'm the odd man out on this panel because I'm not a Middle East specialist, not an Israeli specialist, not a Palestinian specialist. And I think Bashara Dumani, in his wisdom, thought he should get somebody who was from entirely the opposite side of the world to negotiate this evening's events. As a result, I'll be saying very little, but I'll be trying as best as I can to get these proceedings underway. What I'm going to do is introduce everybody. That's going to take a very short time, and then I'll let you know the order in which we're going to speak, and we will follow that order, at the end of which we'll have a long time for conversation with the audience. So let me begin by introducing our guests first. Haneen Zouabi, who is at my far right, is a political and feminist activist who holds an MA degree in mass communication from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. She's been a member of the National Democratic Assembly, NDA, since its establishment, and member of its political leadership since 2000. She was elected to the Knesset as a representative of the National Democratic Assembly in 2009, and again in 2013 and 2015, and was the first MK Arab woman to represent an Arab party. Beside her is Arij Sabah Khoury, and she is the Ibrahim Abu Lugard postdoctoral fellow at Columbia University, Center for Palestine Studies. She's also an associate researcher at Mada Al-Carmel, the Arab Center for Applied Social Research. Her current book project examines relations between members of leftist Zionist kibbutzim and Palestinian villagers in northern Palestine within a settler colonial framework. Beside her is Shira Robinson, who is Associate Professor of History and International Affairs at George Washington University. Shira works on the social and cultural history of the modern Middle East with an emphasis on colonialism, citizenship, nationalism, and cultures of militarism after World War I. Her recent book, Citizen Strangers, Palestinians and the Birth of Israel's Liberal Settler State, examines Israel's imposition of military rule on the Palestinian Arabs who remained within its borders after 1948. The book won a 2014 Outstanding Academic Title Award sponsored by Choice and was listed as one of its top 25 academic books of the year. Immediately beside me is Gershon, and I'll get to Gershon Shafir, is professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of California, San Diego, and the founding director of its human rights program. He received his BAs in political science, economics, sociology, and anthropology from Tel Aviv University, his MA from UCLA, and his PhD in sociology from UC Berkeley. He served as the president of the Israel Studies Association from 2001 to 2003, and is the author or editor of 9 books, among them Land, Labor, and the Origins of the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, 1882 to 1914, which was published in 1989. Since we have introduced our guests first, I will now introduce the person who is in effect our host. And he gets last billing. And he's, of course, is Bashara Dumani, who is the Joukowsky Family Professor of Modern Middle East History and Professor of History and Director of Middle East Studies here at Brown. And he works on the social, economic, and legal history of the Eastern Mediterranean. Dumani is also a public intellectual who writes on current events in the Middle East, on the ethics of knowledge production, and on the relationship between culture and politics. Bashara, thanks for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here, and I now ask you to begin the proceedings with your presentation.
Thank you. I will stand here Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see you. For the first time since 1948, Palestinian citizens of Israel have been consistently in the limelight. It's a major development over the past century. As a historian, I'm going to pull back a little bit and talk about the bigger picture. I want to address for the next few minutes the ideas behind the title Suffocating Embrace ? Which came out from a discussion with the panelists that we've had on email, especially with Arij. For a variety of reasons and to the great chagrin of many Israelis, not all Israelis, but many Israelis today, a significant number of Palestinians remained in what became Israel. They are now about 20% of the population. And, as important, they were given citizenship. At the same time, they were the ones who experienced most intensely the process of settler colonialism in terms of expropriation of land, internal displacement, and effective but largely informal disenfranchisement under the guise of a liberal political order. This is the first meaning of suffocating embrace. They were contained and excluded at the same time. And this is the topic, really, of Shira Robinson's book, Citizen Strangers, which I recommend very highly. But I'd like to talk about two other meanings of suffocating embrace. Many Palestinians who became Israeli citizens embraced the Israeli political order while suffocating themselves. Isolated and cast aside, and for 20 years under military rule, most sought to preserve their language and communal rights while simultaneously searching for normality, social mobility, and even for some acceptance. It is an embrace full of contradictions, best captured in the novel Said the Pessi Optimist by the great Palestinian writer Emil Habibi. But there's a third meaning of suffocating embrace here, and that is a suffocating embrace with the Palestinian national movement. Now, on the level of everyday life, it's amazing how the Palestinians who remained in what became Israel found ways to stay in touch with their relatives and neighbors who were refugees across hermetically sealed borders. And this was, of course, before the internet and social media. But that's not the level of suffocating embrace that I'm talking about. It's rather a suffocating embrace in terms of their relationship and their agency within the Palestinian national movement. Effectively, Palestinians that remained on the land of Palestine as defined by the British Mandate have long been bereft of effective national leadership. Before 1948, the leadership of the Palestinian national movement, which came mostly from Jerusalem, Jaffa, and to some extent Nablus, were either forcibly removed, exiled, by the British authorities during the 1936-39 rebellion, or many of them left months before 15 May 1948, when the British withdrew and the 1948 war officially commenced. And after 1948, the leadership of the Palestinian national movement was effectively outside of historic Palestine until Oslo Accords of 1993. That's a long period. And during this period, the Palestinians who became Israeli citizens were considered by many in that leadership as a compromised population. Some said they were collaborators, that's why they were allowed to stay. Others said, well, these are potential collaborators because they're willing to live among the enemy. Maybe they're possibly spies. They were at once and at the same time embraced as victims and suffocated politically by being cast aside from the Palestinian body politic in terms of their voice within that movement. And here, there's yet another meaning, perhaps, for suffocating embrace. Because it was precisely at the same period of time, from 48 onwards, that the leading political force among Palestinians in the new state of Israel, the Communist Party, supported the partition plan of 1947, November 29, and supported a state for the Palestinians and an Israeli state for the Jews. They're the ones who were the most effective and powerful political force for a long period of time. And they embraced the rights of Palestinian citizens to equality and to social justice, but they also attempted to suffocate the voices of the Palestinians there by insisting that Israel is the only political arena for struggle, and thus separate from the Palestinian national movement as a whole. So it worked from both ways. This began to change, some people say after Oslo. I would like to argue that this began to change well before Oslo. Change, by that I mean we have now a very new situation on the ground, which is why the Palestinian citizens of Israel are much more in the limelight than ever before. I want to talk about an intimate dance between Palestinians living under direct colonial rule, whether they're inside 48 or in the 67 areas. They started dancing to each other's beat, first in the uprising in Gaza in the early 1970s, followed by a youth uprising in 1975-76 in the West Bank, leading to a series of uprisings inside of Israel itself, which became known as Land Day of March 30th, 1976, which was a result of the killing of many Palestinians by the Israeli police as they protested against expropriation of their land. And the dance became more intimate with the 1982 Spring Intifada against the civil administration in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, followed by the big Intifada of 1987 to 1991, which also led to call and response relationship with the Palestinian citizens of Israel. And of course, after Oslo, the connections have gotten much tighter, because this process unfolded as a major tragedy for the Palestinians and ushered in an unprecedented pace of land expropriation and settlement building, which effectively erased the borders between the two areas. Now, after 2005, that Gaza has been spit out because it was a too bitter a pill to swallow, too many people on too small a piece of land and too uppity. And the West Bank pacified by subcontracting the population control of the Palestinians to a Palestinian Authority. The attention has shifted back to the Palestinians in Israel, now increasingly seen as a fifth column. And for the first time, Palestinians in Israel started setting the political agenda, with voices not only asserting that they are Palestinian, Arab and national, by voices asserting that they not only should have political equality as citizens, but also a right to be on that land as Palestinians in a national sense. The narrative of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict was pushed back from talk about 1967 and a two-state solution to the centrality of 1948. And they played a very important role in that. And this erasing of the border and this rise of these voices, ironically, is reunifying the Palestinian population, which is really composed of three segments: those who were Palestinian citizens of Israel, those living under military occupation, maybe 3.5 because Gaza in a separate category as well, and of course, half the Palestinian population, which are refugees. And it is this change that for the first time is making it possible for all three segments of the Palestinian population to think together of a national project in a single political arena. And Palestinians who are refugees are concerned about 1948. Palestinians who are living inside of Israel are now talking about 1948. And the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip who've seen the failure of Oslo are also talking about 1948. And this is a moment of redefinition of the whole conflict and the future possibilities for what might happen to the Palestinians of Israel are wide open right now between a spectrum of possible ethnic cleansing, completing what was not done in 48, all the way to changing the very character of the Israeli state.
Thank you, Bashar. And Shira, it's your turn. And we're going to have short presentations and a lot of time for discussion. So, Shira, you go ahead.
Thank you very much for having me here. I want to speak briefly about some of the institutional, cultural, and political legacies that the first 2 decades of Israeli sovereignty in the 1950s and 60s bequeathed to the contradictory status of Palestinians in Israel today. This is a status that I refer to in my book as citizen strangers. Specifically, I want to make a few points that are often forgotten in discussions about so-called ethnic or ethno-national relations in Israel today. The first is that the people whom Israel refers to today, or the Israeli government refers to today as quote-unquote Israeli Arabs or Arab Israelis, belong to the very same Palestinian Arab families and communities that ended up as refugees over the borders during the 1948 war, whether in the West Bank or Gaza, which fell under Jordanian and Egyptian rule respectively, or elsewhere in the Arab world and beyond. The fact that at the end of the 1948 war, some 150,000 Palestinians found themselves on the Israeli side of the armistice lines or managed to return to it was the result of multiple factors. To start, geography, religion, whether you were Christian, Druze, or Muslim, and the timing of a particular village's conquest by Jewish and then Israeli forces all played a role in whether people fled, tried to stay put, or were expelled. In several cases, where one ended up in terms of being inside Israeli territory or outside of it was the result of good luck, such as connections with high-ranking Jewish officials. In the case of those refugees who managed to survive the dangerous return home back into territory held by Israel, despite the ban on refugee return, it was partly the result of courage and perseverance on their part, on the part of the returnees, and on the part of the family members who sheltered them, and also the result of legal loopholes and an inadequate manpower to guard Israel's frontiers. I emphasize this prehistory up front because it is entirely erased from the mainstream understanding of Israel's so-called Arab minority, both here and in Israel, as if the population always existed as such, as quote-unquote Israeli Arabs. Indeed, since the early 1950s, the label Israeli Arab has been one of the key discursive tools that the state has deployed to try to sever the political, cultural, and historical ties between the Palestinians who became citizens of the state, about 12 to 15% in those early decades, and the much larger Palestinian population who became refugees outside of the state in 1948. One way to think about this term, the Israeli Arab, is as the embodiment of a Zionist fantasy, the fantasy of creating a population of loyal indigenous subjects who would simply accept the ban on the return of their relatives and compatriots and embrace the idea of Jewish privilege in land access, jobs, education, and political power. Now, that the term Israeli Arab was a political and ideological invention may seem like a minor fact or detail, but it is actually crucial to our understanding of how Jews and Palestinians in Israel related to each other and to themselves in the early decades of statehood. On the one hand, Israeli officials, despite the term Israeli Arab, Israeli officials always treated Palestinian citizens of Israel, or the Palestinians inside the country, as Palestinians. That is, they treated them as part of the unwanted enemy, a population which owned a good portion of land that had been conquered and coveted by the state, but which, out of fear of international isolation, the state could not as easily remove after the fog of the 1948 war had cleared. The way that Israel handled the presence of this unwanted minority in their midst was by imposing a harsh, indeed suffocating military regime on the communities where they lived until 1967, on the eve of the June War. The military government in Israel was rooted in British colonial emergency laws that were developed during the campaign to crush the Arab revolt of the late 1930s. These laws, which Israel made extensive use of after 1948, severely restricted the movement, commerce, employment, education, and political expression of Palestinians, while the government figured out how to quietly confiscate as much of their land as possible. We cannot underestimate the impact of military rule during this period. There was, to start off, the confiscation during this time of between 75 to 80% of the land held by the Palestinians who remained in the country. The military rule institutionalized not only physical segregation and geographic isolation, the geographic isolation of the Palestinian population, but also their socioeconomic marginalization in infrastructure, social services, industrial development, and on. The military government also served a critical role in suppressing the Palestinian community, while the government spent 4 years trying to figure out how to write a seemingly universal citizenship law that in practice ensured the legal supremacy of Jews over Arabs. Finally, military rule left behind a climate of Jewish national chauvinism that, by all accounts I have seen, that is, written accounts from the time, was substantively deeper, the chauvinism that is, was substantively deeper than what had existed during the mandate period before 1948. In short, economic, legal, and political privilege institutionalized during the period of military rule created a culture of what both Arab and Jewish critics at the time referred to as a kind of colonial arrogance. Palestinians, for their part, continued to see themselves as part of the Arabs of Palestine, even if they exercised caution in invoking the term Palestine or Palestinian because of their knowledge that doing so could get them in trouble with the internal security services and would likely result in their denial to them of a coveted work or travel permit. We know this because of how they worked to stay in touch with their family members over the border, as Bashara mentioned, but also because of what they wrote, what they read, the kinds of signs that they held up when they did have the courage to protest, and who they listened to on the radio. What I've suggested here so far is that one way to understand the construct of the quote-unquote Israeli Arab is to see it as a kind of Orwellian fiction, since separation and exclusion, rather than incorporation, were the principles that animated Israeli policy towards the Palestinians who remained after 1948. But because Israel was born at the same moment as new international norms regarding Republican citizenship and suffrage rights and the principle of self-determination were all being enshrined on the international stage in the aftermath of the Holocaust and World War II, and because Israeli officials feared that ignoring or alienating the Palestinians in their midst altogether would throw them into the arms of the Arab nationalist movement in Egypt and Jordan and elsewhere, or into the arms, just as for threatening, into the arms of colonized peoples in places like Algeria and South Africa, the Israeli principle of exclusion and separation would have to be adapted. This adaptation, or what would eventually become a kind of forced inclusion or incorporation of Palestinians in Israel, would take multiple forms, starting with the reluctant extension of citizenship to this Palestinian population in 1952, but also including the formation of an Arab educational system that would emphasize, and that continues to emphasize, Jewish history and the Hebrew literary tradition at the expense of modern Arab history and literature, not to mention Palestinian Arab history and literature. And it also included the coerced participation of the population in events like Israeli Independence Day. From both written accounts and oral testimony, We know that Israel's embrace, quote unquote, was no less suffocating than its isolation of the population. So there was both an embrace and a casting aside. As I explore in my book, there were moments in the 1950s and 60s, particularly towards the later part of that period, when the contradictions of the suffering embrace would explode, not only in violence, but also in really powerful protests that would destabilize the political order and make Israel very uncomfortable in terms of its international image. These contradictions would only continue to haunt the relationship between the population and the state in the years to come.
Okay, Arij, yes, please.
Politics is the continuation of war by other means, Michel Foucault wrote in Society Must Be Defended, reversing Clausewitz will warn Decatur. Foucault's point is that there is a continuous battle of sorts that take place in times of peace, and the public space that hosts civil society, with all its depth, substance, and methods of influence, is the ultimate field of battle. Foucault asserts the importance of replacing the judicial discourse with the discourse of war. According to him, the law and official political agreements are imbued with violence, and the modern achievements of establishing government political institution only serve to obscure a continuous infrastructure of war that is inherent to such institution. Utilizing this interpretation, I hope to show how the war waged on Palestine and Israel rages on. The 1948 war hasn't ended for the Palestinians in Israel, the borders of Israel that established in 1949 armistice. The establishment of Israel and the ceasefire agreement with neighboring Arab countries set the stage for the continuation of war by other means, through the imposition of Israeli law over the Palestinian population. This war that started with Zionist colonization in the pre-state era lies within the system of Israeli citizenship. Following the establishment of Israeli state, this war was waged through the enactment of legislation to enable the conquest of as much Palestinian land as possible. Attempts to forbid Palestinian internally displaced refugees from returning to their homes even as they remained as Israeli citizens. This war has been quite explicit from 1948 until 1966. Palestinian populated areas were governed by what my colleague mentioned now, military rule inside Israel. After the military government ended, the implementation of policies discriminating against Palestinian citizens in the political, social, and economic fields continued. Among other Israeli ambitions, this war sought the Judaization of entirely or predominantly Arab areas. Since 2000, and following the outbreak of the Second Intifada, these practices have only escalated, and there has been an unprecedented pursuit of aggressive legislation targeting Palestinian citizens of Israel. Most academic literature that examines the Palestinian citizens' collective activism and organization attributes their activity to reaction against state policy. However, if we analyze the dynamic of the relationship between the Israeli state and the Palestinian citizens since the mid-90s after the Oslo Accords, we notice a central shift in the dynamic. Israel's policies toward Palestinian citizens took on much a more reactive character. This is due to a significant transformation in the political discourse and activism among Palestinians in Israel, taking place on two main levels. The first level, The event of the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe that coincided with the foundation of Israel, have become front and center in the Palestinian political discourse and activism. Until the mid-90s, any discussion or commemoration of the Nakba was suppressed in what I call the public official sphere. Second, Palestinians, represented mainly by the National Democratic Assembly, or Tajammu in Arabic, in which Member Knesset Haneen Zo'bi is affiliated, have expanded efforts to challenge the Jewish character of the state and to demand the transformation of Israel from a Jewish democratic state to a state for all of its citizens. If Israel has succeeded to a certain extent to portray the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank as terrorists, it had no such success in conjuring the same image of the Palestinians inside Israel, who operate within the framework of what I and Nadim Rouhana called the settler colonial citizenship, to challenge the hegemonic character of a Jewish state. This brings us back to politics as war and help us understand the war waged by Israel against its own Palestinian citizens through a variety of means and even during times of peace, to silence the political discourse that heightens Palestinian history and Nakba in proposing solution for the conflict between Israeli and Palestinians. Over the last 2 decades, the Palestinians in Israel have organized to advocate the right of Palestinian refugees and internally displaced refugees to return to their displaced villages and towns. Activists have worked to rebuild the Palestinian collective memory associated with the Nakba. In 1998, ADREED, which is the Association for the Defense of the Rights of Internally Displaced in Israel, collaborated with the High Follow-Up Committee to organize the March of Return in commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Nakba. Since then, every year on Israeli Independence Day, this march highlights the other side of the date, the Nakba, or the disaster of the Palestinian people. Among the march participants are the ADREED, the High Follow-Up Committee, members of certain political parties, NGOs, and independent citizens. The commemoration of the Nakba has become a fulcrum of Palestinian discourse in Israel, and the return of the internally displaced and refugees has become a central issue since 1998. This development followed a multi-generational absence of collective action or any discourse claiming the right of return for refugees publicly and collectively. In response to this shift in discourse, in 2011, Israel enacted the Nakba Law, which limits the funding for any organization that commemorates the Nakba. This law illustrates the serious fear the Israeli state has of reviving discourse of the Nakba and the Palestinian history. The Nakba law followed the ensuring rejection of the right of return law in 2001, passed by the Knesset to disallow the return of refugees to areas located within the borders of Israel, except by approval of an absolute majority of Knesset members. While it's true that the 2001 law concurred with the entry of the Israeli government into negotiations within the Palestinian Authority on a permanent solution, it's important to understand this legislation in the context of the overarching Israeli reaction to the deep transformation in the Palestinian discourse and political activism in Israel. The reactive Israeli state policy is also conspicuous in the escalating frequency and force of political persecution and delegitimization of Palestinian leadership in Israel, mainly against, again, the National Democratic Assembly, Balad or Tajammu Party, which constitute the main force resisting the practices of the state and wishing to decolonize the Israeli state. In its last 2 terms, the Knesset has enacted laws restricting the rights of Palestinian citizens and consolidating the Jewish character of the state. One salient question this raises is why now? Some would attribute this uptake in legislative repression to the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations and the Israeli demand that it be recognized internationally as a Jewish state. I tend to agree with this view, but it's not sufficient in its own. I believe it's important to see these practices in the broader context of the historic and evolving relationship between Palestinian citizens and the State of Israel. Before the emergence of the National Democratic Assembly Party in the mid-90s, there was no political discourse calling for the transformation of Israel from a Jewish state into a state for all of its citizens. That trend has changed. If we review documents issued in the last several years by any of several Palestinian organizations, we find a clear image of what Palestinians in Israel expect of their relation with the State of Israel. We find that these documents reject the exclusive Jewish character of the state and demand democracy and equality. The Knesset responded to this shift as it did to the revival of discourse about the Nakba by attacking civil society and political parties. Most of its fires has been aimed first at Palestinian NGOs, especially those trying to break the taboo of challenging the Jewish identity of the state. This concentrated attack attempts to withhold funding from association or research center that publicly challenge the Jewish character of the state. Second, is the NDA political leadership in manner that resemble what the Israeli sociologist Baruch Kimball called the politicide of the Palestinian leadership outside Israel. What I mean by politicide of the Palestinian leadership inside Israel, not a physical assassination, but rather the delegitimization, demonizing, and eliminating any option for these political leaders to voice their resistance to the colonial project among Palestinian Israel, but also, and most importantly, among the Jewish society. Instead of acknowledging the reality of the Nakba and trying to resolve the conflict on the basis of historical reconciliation and democratization, we are witnessing an ongoing attempt by Israel to silence the history of the Palestinian Nakba. To refer back to Foucault, this policy of Israel to exclude and discriminate, bind and gag constitutes the continuation of war on the Palestinian citizens who managed to remain in Israel. The state wages this war to get them to accept its authority and recognize it as a Jewish, a character of which the majority of Palestinians in Israel have rejected since the state inception in 1948. This rejection has come to be the focus of the collective discourse and manifests as raised voices in the battle over history and the truth, over their existence in their homeland and the demand of the right of return of refugees. Despite the ever-increasing effort of the Israeli government to restrict the ability of Palestinians to bring the history of the Nakba and expulsion, they continue to make new strides. In 2011, on the 64th anniversary of the Nakba, led by the High Follow-Up Committee, Palestinians all over Israel participated in a general strike to commemorate the Nakba Day. Such a move has never taken place before, and it signals that the history of the Nakba and the resistance to the settler colonial origins and policies of the Israeli state continue to penetrate the Israeli public sphere and change the dynamics between Israel and its Palestinian citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Arij. Gershon, your turn.
Thank you very much for having me, all these illustrious guests here. In preparation for today's talk, I looked at the very first article I wrote out of graduate school. It was called Changing Nationalism and Israel's Open Frontier on the West Bank, and it was published in November of 1984. And in the conclusion, I wrote the following sentence, or rather posed the following question. It said, can the Israeli personality, institutions, and forms of domination created in the West Bank be prevented from filtering through into the mainstream of Israeli society and subverting the spirit, even if not necessarily the formal expressions of its democracy? Well, having looked at it just a few days ago, I realized that I was wrong in posing the question in two ways. First of all, what I feared might happen has already happened by the time I posed the question. And second, I also was looking at the wrong place. I was asking how the settler population would affect mainstream Israeli society. In fact, they already were affecting Israel's citizen Palestinians. And I would like to provide you with two illustrations about the connection between Palestinians' experience in the occupied territories and within Israel. That it has been known that the occupation and early colonization of the West Bank and the project that's called the Judaization of the Galilee after the 1967 war were related, but the nature of this connection remained opaque. The director of the settlement department of the Jewish Agency, Ronan Weitz, claimed that he and his department undertook the drive to Judaize the Galilee in 1978 in order to forestall the initiative of the newly elected Likud government to redirect Israeli colonization into the West Bank. A more thorough examination, however, demonstrates that actually the settlement department didn't want, they stalled communal bedroom settlement projects in the Galilee because they are different from the traditional forms of Zionist colonization, which were collectivist. And in contrast to the collectivism of the labor settlement movement, these communal settlements wanted to express the wishes, the aspirations of middle-class families and professionals. Now, this new type of settlement, this communal settlement, within the Green Line, that is within the Israeli ceasefire boundaries of 1948 war, were initiated by a nucleus of technicians, engineers, and researchers at Rafael. Rafael is one of Israel's prominent defense technology companies who are employed north of Haifa. And they sought out the help of the settlement department to establish what they called, I'm quoting here, or translating, I should say, a socially pure, meaning homogeneous, middle-class, ecologically minded, and well-tended rural settlement. In fact, they even picked the location. It was going to be Segev in the Galilee, where the department repeatedly tried and failed to establish a permanent Jewish community. Now, after being rebuffed by the settlement department, the Segev nucleus joined forces to the facility of the Joint Planning Department of the Ministry of Defense with the settlers of Ofra and Alon Shvut. These were the first Gush Emunim colonies in the depth of the West Bank. And the two jointly developed the conception of the communal settlement. And it was only at this stage, in April of 1979, that the Joint Settlement Committee of the Israeli government and the World Zionist Organization resolved to establish Jewish outlooks, as they were called, in the Galilee. By 1983, these outlooks had come to be called communal settlements. And not only did the communal settlements within the Green Line and the occupied Palestinian territories have a common origin, but they also share a neo-liberal character, itself part of the new political and economic life inaugurated by the Likud government. Second example comes from the early wave of Judaization, which led to the establishment of Upper Nazareth in 1954 and Carmiel in 1962. And what happened to, even though these were parts of a Judaization project, Palestinians living in nearby towns and villages purchased homes, and they make up about 20% of the population of Upper Nazareth and 2.5% of the Carmel. In essence, reversing the Judaization project and creating this anxiety about its reversal among Jews. One of the responses to this has been the movement of in Hebrew they are called Gar'in Torani or Torah nuclei, religious groups whose members come either from the military or from settlers from the occupied Palestinian territories who move into these mixed towns in order to reaffirm the project of Judaization. Among them, there are religious women who substitute civic for military service, and they view themselves as ambassadors whose goal it is to create favorable attitudes to Jewish settlement in the occupied Palestinian territories. There exist in Israel several dozen Torah nuclei, and while they are spread out throughout Israel, one of the pronounced preferences is to settle in mixed towns, in the Jewish Arab towns. The largest Torah nucleus of 500 individuals is found in Lod or Lida, and other ones exist in Jaffa and elsewhere. Since 2009, Upper Nazareth had two, those small Torah nuclei. They always have fancy names. One is called Orot Elite, or Topmost Lights, of National Service Recruits, and the other one is called Torat HaChaim, Torah of Life, and the members come from the evacuated settlement of Neve Dekalim in the Gaza Strip. Though the impact on the Jewish-Arab demographic ratio is small, the purpose is to strengthen the religious identity and family structure of Jews within these towns, and then, therefore, to stem the out-migration. The existence of these nuclei, as well as of Palestinian collaborators from the occupied Palestinian territories who have outlived their usefulness and were moved to mixed cities, of course, raises tensions between Jews and Arabs in these cities. Now, clearly, to refer to my colleague, Shira Robinson, the hybrid Israeli liberal settler colonial framework is an unstable construct. On the one hand, it encounters challenges from a greater mixing of Jews and Arabs in the towns that I mentioned, in part due to an upward mobility among a section of Palestinian citizens and the corresponding vibrant civil society that Arish mentioned earlier. And this led to repeated challenges to the Israeli High Court of Justice against discrimination that is rooted in settler colonial motives. On the other hand, repeated efforts of Zionist internal settlement from Judaizing cities, either to communal settlements, to Orthodox neighborhoods, to Torah nuclei, send as proof of a continued attempt to retain the settler colonial framework. So there is a multi-phased cycle in which the liberal and the colonial social and legal constructs battle each other, and they demonstrate that it is much harder to differentiate between the experience of Palestinians who are citizens of Israel and Palestinians who live under military authority, government in the occupied Palestinian territories. Now, it should not be surprising that the settlement patterns develop in the occupied Palestinian territories, as well as settlers who have already lived there and in the occupied territories, should affect Israel's citizen Palestinians first, because Israeli colonization has gone on and still continues on both sides of the Green Line. In the West Bank as much as in the Galilee and the Negev. In fact, just today there is the Israeli government is trying to uproot a Bedouin settlement in the Nakab, the Negev, al-Harin, and replace it with a Jewish settlement called Harin, whose members come from a settlement in the West Bank named Eli. So colonization, to conclude, in the occupied Palestinian territories overshadows the potentially integrative effects of democratic inclusion, and thus serves as a major obstacle to the attainment of Israel's Palestinian citizens' effective civic equality. Thank you.
I should have said at the beginning that we switched things around, and Haneen Zouabi, who is in fact our keynote, didn't come first, obviously, but is going to close the lecture section of our presentation. So, and she'll be speaking a little longer than all of our other panelists have spoken. So, Haneen, please. Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am not used for such a calm atmosphere talking. I forgot how to speak within a calm audience. I would thank, first of all, the Department of Middle East, Bshara Domani. I would thank Barbara very much, Arij, and my colleagues who make my mission now much more easier. I would thank also, I recognize some friends here from the audience, and I want to ask those who come to record me accurately before sending the remarks to maybe the Israeli minister or the Israeli embassy here. Why I'm talking to you, I am supposed to, I am a Knesset member, I am a suspended Knesset member for 4 months. My colleagues in the Knesset who seem not to agree with me has a power to suspend me because of political, ideological disagreements. But I am here because legitimacy is important. You can easily oppress people. Israel can put 2 million Palestinians within the biggest prison in the world, Gaza. 3.5 million behind the wall, as if behind the oceans, not recognizing that they exist. And treat the 1,200,000 Palestinians who are citizens of Israel as an internal Israeli issue. But she needs legitimacy. She has the most powerful military forces in the region, but she needs your legitimacy. And the only debate, the only Israeli conclusion from the daily killing, from persecuting children, political activists, Israeli left-wing NGOs, is how to enhance our propaganda, how to enhance the hasbara, how to convince the international community that it's okay to kill Palestinians, that it is the only way to defend ourselves is to oppress the Palestinian people. Legitimacy is very important. And I don't want you to adopt the Palestinian discourse, nor to like the Palestinians, nor to support the Palestinians, but not to be misleaded. And if you talk about values of liberty, of equality, of justice, not to be misled by the false, absolutely absurdic image of Israel as a democracy. And you must listen not to Haneen. You must listen to 80 racist. You must listen to the Knesset. You must listen to the Israelis more carefully. You must listen to 80 racist laws which Israel has passed during 60 years. Just 30 of them within the last 4 years, and 10 of them within the last 1 year. You must listen how the Israelis demonize the Palestinians, saying, frankly, openly, the Palestinian blood doesn't equal the Israeli blood. They say it. Generals in the army say that. Israeli ministers say that. MKs, the Israeli members of the Knesset, say that. It's part of the discourse. It's a very legal part of the Israeli discourse to see the mourning of the Palestinian mothers not equal to the mourning of the Israeli mothers. It says a lot of things, even you don't need me to tell you about the Israeli policies. You must just carefully listen and follow the Israeli declarations and the Israeli laws and the Israeli policies. And what makes us angry is not just the oppression and the racism and the colonialism. It is how easy Israel continue, how easy it is to occupy the Palestinians, how easy to kill the Palestinians and to portray yourself as the only democratic state in the region. Israel doesn't pay the price of its oppression. Israel doesn't pay the price of the daily killings of the Palestinians and children. Israel has forgot that they are Palestinians. They remember the Palestinians within the siege when the Palestinians sent a rocket to the Israelis saying, we do exist. And we exist. I was supposed to be one of the 1,200,000, 18% of the society in Israel, which should define myself as an Israeli Arab. And what's the meaning of an Israeli Arab? Not Israeli in terms of rights, because I must be Jew, because it is, as my colleague said, it is a Jewish state, and there is no democratic tool to be a Jewish state, no democratic way to be a Jewish state. The only meaning of a Jewish state is to give privileges to the Jews on the expense of the Palestinians, to secure majority, the Jews as majority by citizenship law, by سحب جنسية, skipping,
No, withdrawing.
withdrawing citizenship, and by 4 different laws. Legally, Israel, the racism in Israel is a legal system. It's not a matter of policies. It is the rule of the game to be racist in order to secure a Jewish state. And when we struggle for our rights, when we speak in the Knesset saying, but you are confiscating our land, but you are building your cities and your towns on our land, and you are expelling us. Till now, Israel has the Pravar plan, which Gershon mentioned, which seeks to expel 30,000 Palestinians from the Negev, the south of my homeland, destroying 5 Palestinian villages, and on the same very small area, building 5 Jewish cities. Keeping the Palestinian names, keeping the Arab names, to destroy al-Hiran, and to build on the same small area the Jewish Hiran. It's a state which treats me as even worse than a traditional colonialist system. So, I'm supposed to be Israeli by loyalty and Arab maybe by eating hummus and being exotic within the Israeli society. So I am not exactly the enemy. It's more sophisticated, because sometimes you respect your enemy. Sometimes you realize that your enemy have the right to fight against you because it's a war. I am disloyal. I am worse. I was supposed by the Israeli psychology to be loyal. I supposed to adopt Zionism, to be Zionist, to disengage myself from my people, to delete my history, to give full legitimacy to a project which expelled my 85% of my people, and to regard myself as loyal to this colonialist project. And if I didn't accept this, I would be disloyal. It's to be disloyal to one which was supposed to be one from within your group is more humiliating and oppressing than to be the enemy. So we are part of, we are Palestinians, because this is what we are. We are Palestinians, but we're supposed to be loyal to the project which expelled our people and which continue to expel me in a different way from my homeland. This means Israel has realized that, okay, still there are 15 Palestinians within Israel. We will tame them. If we didn't expel them from their homeland, we will expel the homeland from them. مظبوط بالإنجليزي؟ We'll expel the homeland from them. We will reshape, reformulate their consciousness, their personality, their collective memory. We are not allowed to study our history in the schools. We pay taxes in order to study that this homeland belonged to the Jews. We pay taxes to study how inferior we are and how should we be loyal to our oppressor. Now, the picture is worse than this. This was the reality of 60 years, but something has even changed. Israel is shifting towards not just persecuting the Palestinians inside Israel, but to persecute the very marginal Jewish democratics. Persecute NGOs, left-wing NGOs, adopting fascist features. So we are witnessing a shift from liberal racism, liberal colonialism, to a fascist colonialism, to a fascist racism. And when the so-called left, they are not left. The Zionist camp even has changed. The Labour Party even changed its name from Labour Party to Zionist camp. When they debate with the right wing about laws persecuting NGOs, suspension laws which persecute also the Palestinian political leadership, putting children, assassinating children, when they argue with them, they don't see this is not ethically right. The loyalty law, the Nakba law, the admission committee law, apartheid law, admission committee law, which Gershon mentioned, prevent me from living within 573 community village. Would you imagine that in America? Would you imagine passing a law in America saying that the African Americans are not allowed to live within one community village? You cannot imagine that. And Israel talks about shared values. We know that also this country has conducted a genocide and racial discrimination, but they are, I think, ashamed of it. I think they should be ashamed of it. But now in Israel, they are proud when they are racist towards the Palestinians. This is the difference. What shared value? What shared value? Yes, we can talk about racism also inside the United States. But I think with a feeling of uneasiness and inconvenient. But in Israel, in order to gain power, in order to raise your popularity, you must be hostile to the Palestinians. In order to enter elections and gain and win the elections, you must be as much as you are hostile to the Palestinians. But again, something is changing. And the debate between the Zionist camp, the Likud Bet, the right-wing A and right-wing B, there is no left in Israel. There is no... Okay. The debate is we don't need it. We don't need such laws because we already control the Palestinians. It's not that this is ethically not right. The debate within the Israeli society between the Likud and those who oppose such laws as acceptance laws and as suspension laws, the NGO bills which persecute the left wing, is that we already control the situation. We don't need such laws. It's damaging our image as a democracy. Not that it is not ethical, that it is, we are adopting fascist features, that it doesn't go side by side with our image to ourselves as a democracy, that the only debate that it is damaging to Israel. There is not one statement about the Palestinian rights. Everything they are dealing with, the occupation, is from the eyes of security, our security benefit. The other doesn't exist as a human being. Totally demonization. When the most famous journalist in the Israeli Galet Sahal, the radio of the army, say that the mourning of the Palestinian family, mother, is not equal. No, the Jewish blood, I must be accurate also. The Jewish blood is dearest to me than the Palestinian blood. This means everything. Why is this shift? And I have just 20 minutes. First of all, we should remember that now the settlers of the 67 constitute, they are in the power. They ever were in the power. 30% around, if you can accurate, يعني كان يصلحني, correct me, 30% of the army now constitute of settlers of the 67. Lieberman, which was on the margins of the Israeli discourse in 2003, he was the foreign minister, and he now in the top of the Israeli regime. And why now they are oppressing more any alternative vision, and in the Holy Knesset they are just one party which suggests an alternative vision. My party, the Joint Arab List. Started with my party, the Joint Arab List. شو تتركب?
It's
composed from 4 different Arab parties. One of them is the Arij mentioned, the National Democratic Assembly, my party, which suggested something very threatening: equality. Something which Yuval Diskin, the head of the Israeli intelligence, described in 2008 as a strategic threat. Struggling for democracy within Israel is a strategic threat, not Daesh, not military struggle. Democracy is threatening to Israel. And Yuval Diskin has described in 2008, said that there are 3 major strategic threats to Israel. It was before the Arab Spring, but still partially it's valid still. The nuclear Iran, Hezbollah, and those within us who challenge Israel as a Jewish state. So the vision of democracy, our struggle for what? For equality, for a normal state. I am the indigenous people with the pride of and with the collective memory of the indigenous people we are suggesting equality with the Israelis. And for us, it's a huge historical compromise. For us whom Israel came to our land, expelled our people, not realizing that she is doing a tragedy, not realizing anything. We are presenting for the Israeli society, we the indigenous people are representing to the immigrants a vision of peace with justice, to live within a normal state. And this is for us a huge, again, a huge historical compromise. And we are willing to take this huge historical compromise. But it seems that Israel wants to go to the extremely other direction. Now she controls, she has managed not to solve the struggle, but to إدارة الصراع, to manage the crisis, to manage the crisis. 2 million within a siege, 3.5 million behind the wall as if, and Judaizing Jerusalem. And who is the problem now? Those who are supposed to be part of us in loyalty terms. Those who are supposed to be an internal, as I said, an internal Israeli issue. And Israel thought that it could suggest us citizenship as a bargain, مقايضة, عملية مقايضة, a bargain with our loyalty and with our struggle for true equality. The name of the game, as Shira said, in the first 20 years, the 50s and the 60s, was to survive. We wanted just to survive. Israel has not just expelled 85% of our people, expelled the most educated, the elite, the middle class. We are the less powerful part of our society. So we want to survive. We didn't understand what happens. Yesterday we were 850,000, and today we are 150,000. With everything has changed. So even we didn't understand what's happening to us, and the name of the game was to survive. Within the 70s and the 80s, the name of the game was equality as citizens. Okay, we are internal part of Israel. Maybe we can merge in one way or another. Maybe we can manage to be Israelis still. And we are more, in a one way, in the political sense, we are more Israelis than Palestinians. We are Palestinians in our emotions, maybe, in our internal debate. After Oslo, when Oslo said to us, you are an internal Israeli issue, you has nothing to do with your people, you must accept Israel as a Jewish state with all the meanings of colonization, of oppression, of deleting our history, we said no. We cannot. We took our citizenship seriously. And the only meaning to take our citizenship seriously is to have full citizenship, real citizenship, and conditioned citizenship. That this citizenship should accept me as indigenous. This citizenship should accept me as Palestinian. And the name of the struggle was to challenge the main obstacle to democracy. The main obstacle to democracy is state, is the definition of the state as a Jewish state. What is happening in the last since the elections, when Netanyahu declared that the Arabs are a threat because they are going in a massive way, because they're voting. I am a threat because I'm practicing the minimum right of citizenship. I am a threat because I took my citizenship seriously and I am going to vote and to participate in this, in the margins of the Israeli democracy. And this was the strategy of political transfer. If not physical transfer, if not ethnic cleansing, then political cleansing. Then those who challenge Israel as a state, as a Jewish state, we should suspend them, not temporarily as now. I am suspended for 4 months. Because of what? Because we met with the with the Palestinian families from Jerusalem who want to bury their children whom has been killed by the Israeli forces. And they have accepted all the conditions to bury them after midnight, not to do التشريح, autopsy,
Autopsy.
of the not to make an autopsy in order to see if they have bleeded for a long time. And they accepted, and we went to the Interior Ministry, to the Interior Security Ministry, and then it was this decision of the ethical committee in the Knesset to suspend us. Now,
Because they were holding the bodies.
yeah.
They don't know.
Holding the bodies, yeah. صح. For 4 months. For 4 months. Now, I just want to give you a little bit description about the last 10 laws which has been passed through the last year. 6 about children. 6 laws about how to oppress children. Out of 10 or out of 11. وين الورقة البيضاء هاي؟ yeah, okay. 6 about children. Severe punishment for very young children. Minimum 2 till 4 years to everyone who thrown a stone. Lower the age of criminal responsibility. To punish parents whom their children have been arrested for throwing stones. Charge children by military court. It is not a new one. So 6 to oppress children. In Israel, there is no meaning of Palestinian children. Criminality, according to the law of the children law, the Israeli children law, you cannot charge children under the age of 14 or 12, and you must rehabilitate them. But this is not valid for the Palestinian children. To put them in charge, to put them in front of the court as if they are adults. So 6 regarding children, 4 regarding political activists, 2 regarding left-wing NGOs, 1 regarding prisoners, and 2 regarding the land, the admission committee, and Pravar plan that I mentioned to expel and destroy the Palestinian villages. Now, as I said, this fascist transformation is not a new and a totally new trend. It has been based upon the definition, the laws of the game, to have a Jewish state, and the whole debate is taking place within the Israeli society, within those who want to control with more sensitivity to the Israeli image and to the Israeli legitimacy within the world, and those like Netanyahu, like Lieberman, who are competing between them about how much hostile we can be towards the Palestinians. Okay, I said that. The most important point that I want to end my speak with, the new suspension law. Now Israel is and this is very important. This is to understand Israel now, not to understand Israel within the 60 years. Something changes. We must look at the bigger picture, but something dramatic is taking place right now, and we should follow, because the reality after this suspension law is different than the reality before, and the reality after إخراج الحركة الإسلامية عن القانون, outlawing the Islamic movement, which passes 1 month ago without any criticism, without raising any debate, outlawing the Islamic movement without any charge. In Israel, okay, I violated the law. We are willing to go to court. There is a criminal law. You must give me my rights and prove that we are terrorists, by a legal process. There is no need to this tyranny of the majority. But no, the game is not security and violating laws. It's an ideology. It's if you disagree and challenge my discourse, I will destroy you. There is no debate now. Now politics for the Palestinians is فائدة عن الحاجة, has no meaning, politics. If 500,000 from my people can vote for me and 90 from the Knesset member can suspend me, then voting and elections has no meaning. According to the new law. Yes, but even without this new law, we have this ethical committee in the Knesset which can suspend for maximum 6 months. But it is not enough. It is not enough. Without any legal process now, according to the current situation, Israel can suspend any MK because they didn't like our views. They don't like it. They don't like it. I must be Netanyahu light. I must be some version of Zionism. And for them, they cannot, the Israeli society cannot understand what we are doing. They are surprised every time. You are Palestinians. The debate, it's difficult to challenge and to struggle against racism. But believe me, it's more difficult to speak about the taking for granted. We are speaking thus against it with things which are taken for granted. But I'm a Palestinian, so what do you expect from me? I must oppose your racism. I cannot identify with you and agree that in order to defend yourself, you must kill 180 children. And you must bomb 500 children in Gaza. And you can put my people into jail. And this is what I said to you, and it's so important to understand this situation which is so unique to the Palestinians within Israel. Again, this loyalty issue. And because they disagree with our attitudes, now they have the ability to suspend us for 6 months. But it is not enough. They need now. And just yesterday, the committee of the Knesset committee, the committee of القوانين, laws committee, legal committee, has approved the first draft of this suspension law, which gives 90, as I said, 90 Knesset members, if they disagree with our statements, opinion, and I'm supposed to have an immunity. So even this definition of democracy as a procedural democracy in Israel, democracy means nothing outside the tyranny of the majority. No guarantee of human rights, of course no First Amendment, no guarantee of citizenship rights, of equality, nothing. You are a majority in the Knesset, you can do everything. You can do everything, anything. And within this situation, within this atmosphere, a university can call a professor to جلسة استماع تأديبية, to hearing, because he wrote it in his Facebook that we should be sensitive to the Palestinian suffering. He didn't talk about even to struggle against the occupation. To be sensitive. No. It's illegal in Israel to be sensitive to the Palestinians. It's something contradicting the definition of the state. And now, I will finish by saying that it's so important for us, international community, the Israeli, I cannot say the Israeli democratic forces because there is no democratic forces. There are maybe, I don't know, voices, yes, voices. It is so important for us, your role, and for us, and for me. I consider myself to represent not just my people, not just values of justice and freedom. I represent the Israelis who also want to live in a normal state. If I was Daesh, I would be more accepted, maybe. It is the fact that we represent democratic voice, liberal voice, feminist voice. We talk about values which Israel consider itself the exclusive representative of. Suddenly, they have a modern Palestinian leadership who don't have any feelings of inferiority, which we feel moral superiority. We feel moral superiority. We are not the image of the good Arabs that they were used to 50 and 60 years. We talk about social justice, equality between men and women, equality between the Jewish and the Palestinians. And we are the I don't حتى مش عارفة بالعربي even Arabic I don't know ولا بالهيبرو لا مش عارفة شو الكلمة we are the real voice I don't know now I forget the other okay that's it thank you
Thank you, Haneen, for that very passionate presentation. And I'm certain that we have questions from the audience. We have two microphones in the middle of both rows, and we're going to ask anyone who wishes to ask a question. We're going to ask you not to have long speeches, but pointed questions, and we'll have hopefully a passionate discussion. Please, don't rush, but try to make it to the microphones.
you agree with that?
Okay. Yes.
I'll go first. Hi. Haneen, I want you to talk about the BDS movement. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'm a student at Wheaton College. I just finished my senior thesis in anthropology on Palestinian activism, both in Palestine and in the US. And I want you to speak a little bit about the BDS campaign in relation to Israeli politics.
I'm going to suggest that we take up a couple of questions, and you can give your name and say who you want to answer the question, or you can have a general question. But I'll take a couple first, and then we'll ask whoever is pointed at to answer. Okay, well, Haneen, you go ahead, and we'll take it from there.
As I said, Israel is so sensitive to its international image as a democracy, so the BDS would be a very efficient tool to let Israel pay some price of its crimes. We cannot wait for any internal Israeli dynamics from within. The solution will not lie within the Israeli from within. If we waited for some changes, the direction is so clear. So there are just two ways to change this reality. First of all, the Palestinian struggle itself. And there are a lot to reconsider also our own Palestinian national project after Oslo, and to conclude a very, I would say, tragedical and mu'lim, painful conclusions. This is the first source or dynamics to change reality. And the second is the BDS. And when we say BDS, we must also explain why we are boycotting Israel. Why? Not just to say because of occupation and because of oppression. when we develop and promote academic boycott, we must indicate what the Israeli university, how the Israeli universities deals with the Palestinian students, how they oppress the Palestinian students, how they try to silence the criticism within the universities. And because the image of Israel as a democracy, a democracy is so important, the only way to send a message that something is wrong here, that you are violating, you are not a spoiled child, that you can do anything in this world, and you cannot silence us by saying anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism. And the Palestinians will not be the one who also pay the price of the Holocaust and will pay the price of the anti-Semitism and will pay the price, the support of the USA and others. This is could be a very efficient law. And I am saying to you that the BDS is one from the very, very, very few issues which raises debates within the Israeli society. Raises debates. We are Knesset member, we have no power. Our criticism, Israel even doesn't pay attention to our criticism. We cannot affect the Israeli, really the Israeli. When we must talk with the Israeli public opinion, we must go to the international community in order to, I am talking now, I consider myself not just to talk to you. I consider myself to talk to the Israeli public opinion because maybe you can be the mediator between we and them because they don't hear us. They don't hear. When we say protest the confiscation in the Negev, do you know what kind of answer we get? But you are the invaders. But you are the new crusaders. Crusaders. I am the new crusaders? I didn't know. I'm the new crusader. So, you are much more, you, a student, you are much more effective than me, and I'm Keith. When you criticize Israel, when you write anything in the media, your article would be more efficient than my article, unfortunately.
But please continue to... Excuse me, can you say one good thing about Israel and Israel?
عادي أوفير. His wife, really? They are good things, very good thing. I'm referring to my friends, the Israeli friends here.
She refers to two, actually.
Two.
No, but I think,
Three, maybe.
no, but I think...
What about Gideon Levy? What about
Yeah.
B'Tselem? What about those organizations that support the Palestinians? You don't mention this at all. It's like a Gordian knot. Each one attacks the other, demonizes the other, and it seems like you're enjoying it deep down. You're enjoying it. You don't want peace.
So now
You don't want peace. Israelis don't want peace. There will never be peace.
Okay. So now you seem that you understand my feelings, that I enjoy it. Okay. I mentioned them.
Talk to the mic, please. I can't hear you.
I mentioned them. I said that the Israeli institution is persecuting even the left-wing voices inside Israel. I refer to the left-wing voices as B'Tselem, as professors, left-wing professors in the universities, whom also I mentioned. Break the silence, the NGOs. Of course I did. It was implicit in my speech that the Israeli institution, the political culture within Israel is persecuting now even those margin voices which try to promote and to struggle for equality and for democracy and against the siege and against the occupation. Of course I did. So I am saying this again.
Okay. Oh.
Hi, my name's Sam. I have some more political questions, but actually I wanted to ask you something more academic and a little bit broader. And I direct this to you, Hanin, but if the professors in the room want to chime in. So you talked about the idea of what it means to you to be an indigenous person and to represent indigenous people, and the tension of, we're seen as the invader, but we're the indigenous and they're the immigrant. So I want to ask you, what does it mean to you to be a native? Who is a native person? And at what point do you become a native person? And how do you deal with, if you have Zionists conceived themselves as being natives of this place, regardless of where they're from. So how does that fit into your definition of what you consider?
Yeah, let me take the other question, and then we can have some answers.
Hi, my name is Ben. First of all, thank you all so much for being here, and it's really a pleasure to hear from all of you. My question is also for Ms. Zawabi, but of course, if anyone else wants to answer.
Your name, please?
I'm Ben. Benjamin.
Benjamin.
So you were just talking a moment ago about those figures in the Israeli left, NGOs and professors, etc., who are speaking out against the policies of Likud and against the occupation. And you've also, though, talked about a need for greater Israeli isolation in the international community.
Can you speak slowly, please, in order for me to understand?
Absolutely. You've also spoken in favor of greater isolation of Israel in the international community. And my sense, at least, is that issues relating to Palestine and the Palestinian people are already very central in Israeli politics and media, and academia as well. And that the rockets that you mentioned coming from Gaza as Hamas's means of expressing its existence, and the impact they have on civilian lives and the civilian deaths they cause, actually become a really important part of Likud's narrative. And even that the Labor Party fell because of after a failure in a war and feelings of international isolation. And I'm wondering how you reconcile your call for isolation with the existence of an Israeli left that seems to hurt a lot from that isolation.
I didn't understand your question.
I'll explain.
Okay.
Bashar?
Would not the isolation of Israel also isolate the forces within Israel who are struggling for change in a positive way, right? Would that be?
Yes, and also that they really empower the Israeli right.
Okay, thank you.
So they are disempowered by. Yes, please. Well, it's not
Yep.
my place.
Thank you for the panel so far. I have a very simple question. In the end, what is the purpose of this debate? Is it to find an answer to the futures of the Palestinians in Israel? Because if we want to truly look into this issue, why bring only people who all agree with each other? Why not also bring people who represent the security aspect of Israel, the security ideas, the ideas of also the religion there? I would truly like to hear a debate that looks at both sides in order to reach some kind of an idea of how to solve this conflict, because what we've heard so far is only one side. I would really like to hear the other side too. Thank you for the panel.
Thank you. Okay, we have a few questions on the table. Bashara, you want to?
Yeah, I want to start with Roe's
Yes,
question.
sure, go ahead.
Who's been coming to our events, and we've been emailing back and forth, and I think it's important to explain that this is not a debate, and it's not meant to be a debate. Certainly the idea is not to have a CNN style, this is your story, this is my story, let's recognize the humanity of each other and then find some sort of a solution that we both can live with. Because this is really a critical conversation in what sense? In the sense that, two senses. One is that the departure point is not the punches and counter punches of public discourse and nationalist narratives. But rather an issue of intellectual and political consequence using academic standards of knowledge as the baseline. So what we do share in common, many of us here, is that Israel cannot be understood properly unless the features of it as a settler colonial project are understood. If most academics looking at that history think that this is an attractive and maybe even dominant framework for understanding the conflict, then we start from there and then we go on to a debate, well, what does that mean and what can we think about in terms of the future? That debate that conversation is not a debate in the sense of this is the Israeli story and this is the Palestinian story and let's find some common ground. For example, one of the critical conversations that we had, the first one, was called After Oslo. The question for us was not to have, again, talking heads saying Oslo is good and somebody saying Oslo is bad and then trying to find some middle ground. I think most academics who studied the issue understand that this was a major tragedy for the Palestinians for reasons that I mentioned before and others. And therefore, the question we wanted to ask is, well, what does this mean in terms of changes in Palestinian political culture? What does this mean about the conditions of possibility for some form of coexistence in the future? What does this mean in terms of the changing nature of Israeli society? What does this mean in terms of the new political dynamics of the Palestinian Authority, et cetera, et cetera? This is where we wanted the conversation to go. So here, the question about suffocating embrace is not to say that there's a debate between an Israeli perspective, because there isn't a monolithic Israeli perspective. I think Brian and I are the only people here who don't hold an Israeli passport and don't speak Hebrew fluently or at all. This is a range of opinion here of people who were born in Israel, all the middle people. And they have a very critical perspective, a perspective that I think has strong roots in rigorous intellectual production in the university system, but does not fit with the public discourse about the issues. So in that sense, we're having a critical conversation within that accepted denominator of intellectual production in a university setting. We can have a big conversation about, well, maybe the settler colonial paradigm is not the best paradigm. Maybe there's another way of thinking about the history of this issue. We can have a debate about, but what does that mean? I mean, it's not the same everywhere. There's different settler colonial societies with different specificities. How exceptional is this situation? How comparative is it to some, like Australia or New Zealand or some other place? We can have a debate about, well, what responsibility do Palestinians bear if they insist on agency? I mean, I think that could be a good question for Haneen, is you want your voice to be heard, you want to have agency, you want to say that you should be listened to. Well, what responsibility then do you have about what's going on inside the Palestinian body politic itself? It's not exactly a nice situation. We can talk about that. And so on and so forth. But I don't think should be any pretense that Israel is just an unvarnished democracy. The Palestinians are not appreciating the fact that they have citizenship and been allowed to stay, and we should listen to that side of the argument. We could do that outside these halls, but I don't think this is where the scholarship is.
Shall I answer?
Okay, yes, Haneen, please go. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sam, thank you for your question. Actually, even I will answer who is natives. In this context between me and the Israelis within the last 70, 80, 90 years, I was in my homeland. I know why you need the microphone. I didn't need a Balfour Promise. I don't need any religious textbook. I just was there. I didn't even need a dream to be there. It was a reality. It was a reality versus the dream of other group of the world. But this is not the question. The question is, can you justify expelling people? Can you justify killing? Can you justify oppression? Even in the name that this was your land 2,000 years ago. I don't want even to enter this debate. I don't need to. I'm talking about the human beings and rights of people. I'm talking about dignity. I'm talking about the minimum protection of human lives. I'm talking about ethnic cleansing. I'm talking about facts. This debate, we can raise this debate as an academic debate. For me, in the clash between me and Israel, it's so obvious the answer. That there was a Zionist project, that this is an empty land, a land without a people, which was promised to a people without a land. But it was not a land without a people. It was, no one doubted now, no one debated that it was a land with a people, not without a people. And it was no way, no human and democratic and reasonable and ethical way to give this land to other people without making the ethnic cleansing, without making the oppression, without the disposition, without the continuous colonization till now. It is not a project. It is not that Israel came and expelled the Palestinians and say, okay, from now on, I will be a democracy. No, it is an continuous Nakba, continuous project of colonization. Because still the people there, still I cannot give up and give legitimacy to Israel. And still Israel needs to kill and to oppress and to be violent and to expel and to evacuate till now, to evacuate the Palestinian citizens from the Palestinian historical cities, Yafa, Elad, Ramli, Haifa, till now. Till now there are housing projects which we need to appeal to the court in order to be able to live there. Now, Benjamin, no, actually, to isolate Israel and to let Israel pay the price of its crimes, I think this is the only. No one give up his. Wenak Ben? When Ben? No one give up his privileges. No one. No. Societies and people all around the history didn't end their occupation or their oppression without struggling. And one of the tools is to isolate Israel, to let Israel pay the price. Because how I can convince the Israelis to give up occupation? They benefit economically. They benefit in terms of land and a solution for housing problems. They benefit, economically they benefit it, and they don't pay the price. It is not an ethical debate, it's politics. And politics is about interest and paying the price. And no, you know what? It is not what Haneen says, it's also what she mentioned Gideon Levy. So it was Gideon Levy who wrote an article saying, please Europe, help us, boycott us. It was these forces who are addressing the Europeans, saying, help us as democratic forces, voices within Israel, help us and boycott us. Because, you know what? I think they suffer more than me. I think these voices, the really anti-Zionist, liberal, democratic voices within Israel suffers more than me. They are totally isolated within their society. No, I'm not isolated. When Israel incite against me, I have a backup from my people. And they can tell me, go ahead, and don't give up. But they don't have such a support. They are more isolated than me. I can be heard within the universities and accepted by the universities. Of course, sometimes more than Reuven Rivlin, Ra'is Doli.
The president.
Yeah, that of the president. Now, they are saying that the only way for them to be heard and to influence, to have tools to influence the society, is to have a support and international support. And a lot of them are leaving. Look at them. They are leaving. We don't want for them to leave. So the boycott will maybe help them to stay. Yeah.
Okay, there's one person on the floor, but I'd like to take the chairman's prerogative and just ask a very quick question. It's almost 7:32, so we'll try to do everything before we go. But I'm still not getting a sense of a midterm future here. I'm seeing an immediate strategy being proposed, or a tactic perhaps being proposed. But what is the 50-year future of this long game? And I'd love to put that on the table to see at least if there's any sense. Are we looking at a one-state solution? Forgive me for being trite here as a non-Middle East expert. Are we seriously looking at that now as an alternative in the next 50 years? Are we playing around with Oslo version 2 point something? What is the 50-year future? That's the question I'd like to put on the table. But can we have maybe these two questions and then we try a last round of answers? Yeah.
I'm only asking a question because she already has, and I don't think she should again. Honestly, she went back and forth with Haneen several times. I'd like to ask, since Haneen in particular mentioned how, in a sort of tragic way, we become the mediator for her to get back to speak to her own parliamentary body, if we could talk about something that Bashara raised in brief, which is, so how can we bring something like advocacy for international pressure together with a national project at this conjuncture? And this is equally for Haneen and for the scholars on the panel. What potential developments in the new limelight that Palestinians in Israel have, together with obviously the fragmentation continued over decades of the Palestinian body, political body, where do you see particular developments politically that could result in uniting Palestinians within their greater land, given that the PA functions essentially as an enforcer of the occupation at this moment, subcontracted by Israel, as Bashara mentioned, and that there are a sort of splintering of different parts of the Palestinian body.
You didn't introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Kareem Estefan. I'm a first-year PhD student in modern culture and media here.
Thank you. Okay, can we have a response, please? Or question, rather. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to respond to your statement that Israel didn't pay the price. Israel has been paying the price over and over again when terrorists murder Israeli citizens. And it has happened several times, and even now, with knives. And you know about this. But I just want to say that this seems to be like a Gordian knot. I don't know. I'm an Israeli myself. I don't know how this situation can repair itself because there is so much demonization of each side, and there's no sense of forgiveness or getting together, or singing together, or praying together. Nothing. This is really, I think, as Amos Oz said, a clash of two wrongs.
Thank you. Can we have quick responses to any of those points coming down the line?
Yeah, I will start very briefly because we don't have that much time, and it's a long row. I want to begin by acknowledging the great importance of tone. I'll give you a very quick story. After mostly Israeli historians were able to see the declassified Israeli archives back in the late 1980s and wrote these devastating books which basically said everything the state has been saying about what happened in 1948 is a lie and a myth, and that the Palestinian story is pretty much actually what really happened in terms of expulsion, et cetera, et cetera. When they wrote that, in academia here in the United States, these myths, founding myths of Israel of 1948, were written up and synthesized into a number of articles. One was written by a friend of mine who's supposed to be here tomorrow, Zachary Lockman, who said, titled the article, the original sin, 1948 as the original sin. Students of mine in the class were surprised at the content, but a few of them just simply could not even deal with the content because they didn't like the title. They just thought it was too offensive. So next year, I signed an article by another person, Avi Schleim, who teaches at Oxford, whose content is exactly the same. You know, they lied about this, they lied about that, it was actually this, it was actually that. But he titled the article, Debate About 1948. And they loved it, right? They had no problem with the content, it's just the tone pissed them off, these few students. So I can see, I want to acknowledge that this is really an important part of a conversation, is the tone. But sometimes, you know, there's room for different kinds of tones. I'm just saying that I acknowledge that. Now, the 50-year thing. We've had panels in the past in which really took a hard look at the internal Palestinian situation as opposed to a hard look at Israel, right? And it's clear from those panels and these things that actually the Palestinians still have to answer two very important questions. What do they want and how do they want to get there? There's still too much lack of clarity about this, partly because of this fragmentation that is a result of forces far more superior to themselves for what a variety of reasons, but they need to clean up their own house and figure out what is it that they want and how they want to get there. Okay? Nothing is going to happen until that, but that may be for time for another panel. But the other part of it is that most Israelis who are now swept up in this current of just unabashed racism, it's almost like a national sport. I mean, you go to the stadiums, the soccer, I mean, the famous chant is not like, I support this team, it's like death to Arabs, death to Arabs. It's like thousands of people shouting it. That's like kind of the national chant. I mean, they need to wake up. And nothing's going to change until that happens. Now, I don't know how people fix their own internal problems, and I don't know how they wake up. But I do know as a historian that sometimes these things take generations, and sometimes they happen almost overnight. And my hope is that they will happen very quickly, and because 50 years is 2 generations, and you need at least that long from waking up or fixing yourselves to even get to a point where you can actually build something.
Okay, we don't have much time, but if anyone wishes to make a quick comment, please, this is your last chance. So
50 years.
Arij, you okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, Arij, you go and then
Okay, I'll say something about the future. I think talking about the Palestinian and Israel, one of the most important components that can lead maybe a different future and very democratic tools is the Palestinian and Israel. I talked about the National Democratic Assembly in which Haneen talked about. The issue of decolonizing Israel starts from in Israel. If we can think about stages, now to decolonize Israel means that they privilege the Jews and get equality between Palestinians and Israel. Even if Palestinians and Jews can't live nowadays in one historic place that is called Palestine. If we can start by stages and lead a discourse and activism of democracy, of equal citizenship between Jews and Palestinians. This is one of the aspects that I think international voices would be important, and the universities in the United States and the role of this is to deconstruct Israel as democracy. This is how the international sphere can help Palestinians and Israelis who are willing to live together in the same space, because most of the voices that have been mentioned here, what are the real left in Israel, which are anti-Zionist voices, are leaving Israel. Among them, there are 2 at least in this audience that I know about. As Palestinian, I feel despair. I live in what is called now mixed community. To tell you the truth, there is no way out in the situation that is Haneen has talked about. There is no way. Or there is something has to be imposed upon Israel to democratize itself. And the Jews' voices inside Israel are most important in this process. Or, sorry to be so hopeless, or we might envision another transfer. Sorry about that, but this is my feeling. I have two Jewish Israeli neighbors, and it is really difficult. It is really difficult. This is sorry about but this is the feeling. And this is why it's important, the work of Haneen
And we are
others.
not desperate.
And we are not desperate, which is so, this is why I support also these voices, because we need a way out.
Okay, we literally have no more time. But,
I will
Haneen,
comment.
please,
Okay.
a comment, yes.
First of all, 50 years from now, let's face it, without being frustrated, and I don't recognize this expression of are you desperate or are you
Hopeful, optimistic.
optimistic or pessimism. I don't believe in optimism. I don't believe in pessimism. I believe that you have two ways, either to struggle or to accept your reality. I believe that you must struggle. And I don't care whether the aim is far away or whether it's close. And I think this is not this is not the right question. The right question is whether we are going in the right direction. And I don't care about how long. Maybe the next generation, the coming one, the direction. Are we going in the right direction? I think yes. And I think that the alternative is to give up, is to do nothing, and we cannot give up. It's our life. This is our homeland. This is our life. We feel we are struggling for a just case, and even if we don't see in the near future any real change, we must say no, because we must resist. Even if you don't have the solution, it is not that either there is a solution or you are desperate. You must keep your معنويات.
Morals.
Morals. You must
Keep them high.
You must keep your strength
Morale.
morale.
Sorry.
You must keep your ability to say no. You must at least secure your national personality. It is for ourselves, for the Palestinian side, Israel. Our struggle is to secure our youth, to make them conciliate between real citizenship and full identity, just to make them believe in their ability to keep their national identity and to be part of the politics. This is enough. Sumud. You know the word in Arabic is sumud.
Survival.
La,
No,
survival.
steadfastness.
Steadfast. Okay, we cannot change reality. At least to steadfast. This must be. This is a message, and this is not a marginal message. This is not a weak message. Even if you cannot change reality, sometimes just to keep strong with you, not to give up your dream, not to give up your rights. It is a success. It's a kind of success, and it's a kind of strength. And not to close files. Azmi Bishara, you mentioned Azmi Bishara. Azmi Bishara used to say, now in Arabic, معلش
He's
شوية
the
عربي.
founder of the party.
The founder of the party. يعني الصمود وبناء الذات طالما أنت مش محقق الهدف. Yeah, to build our institution, to keep our generation aware of their situation and of their rights. And this is in itself a big challenge. Now, just one sentence to.
I think she left.
I would say to her, okay, I want to feel that she is sincere in her willingness to find a solution. I don't know how to reach the solution, but I know how to start for her, how to start. To start by not accepting any موازنة,
Any
balance between oppressor and oppressed. Not, if you enter this category of balance,
Parity or balance.
yeah,
Parity, yeah.
then there is no way then the reality, we will continue in the same tragedy. Just get out this quotation, معادلة,
This
equation of balance between oppressor and oppressed. No balance between occupied and the occupied forces, between oppressed and oppressor.
Thank you, Haneen, Shira, Harish, Gershon, and Bashara Dumani.
And thank you, Brian, for leading.
And thank you, audience. You're such a nice, decent audience. Clap yourselves.